The Florida Panthers take their show on the road in Boston. For the first time, they will be playing a road game outside the state of Florida in over a month. We're going to discuss how much the Florida Panthers are looking forward to getting back on the road.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Friday, May 10th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. If you follow me on X at Monoman12, follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. There's no I in team, but there's one in Indeed, and that's the hiring platform you need to build yours. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. So it's a game day. Thankfully, once again, with these 1 day gaps in between games, we can just quickly do a post game. Only for the Panthers, they get back to practice and then leave immediately after the practice. They're already settled in Beantown and ready to take their show on the road, their first road game outside of the state of Florida in over a month. But it is a Friday, which means it is a Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Nich Fairbanks is back here to preview tonight's game between the Florida Panthers and the Boston Bruins, Game 3 from the TD Garden, but also to discuss more about his opinions on not only Wednesday night, but the series as a whole so far. But Nich, welcome back to the show, my friend. Great to have you here.
I think I'm just getting, thank you. And I think I'm just getting over the itchiness portion of growing the beard right now. So I think it's going to be smooth sailing. I just need the boys to keep winning. And hopefully, we don't end up like the Carolina Hurricanes, who last night didn't get swept, but they're about to be swept 3-0 against the Rangers. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, and a lot of questions if they do get swept, what might happen with their coaching staff too. But that's something to get into segment number 2 to talk about where the Florida Panthers actually stand in things. But for me, I don't grow my beard, so it's not the most comfortable right now, especially when it gets on the lips. Don't. I hope that this lasts till June, obviously. But once it does, it's coming right off. But let's give you. I want to give you an opening statement on just the series and your thoughts on the Florida Panthers through 2 games where this series is tied at 1 after taking over the last 40 minutes. So the floor is yours, my friend.
So I want to take everybody down a trip, down memory lane and really talk about like what happened, between game 1 and, when, Florida clinched their series. They had a few off days, they had a few practices, they went hard. But at the end of the day, they were not playing real games. They were just getting their routines in, they were skating, they were making sure their cardio was up there, that they're in shape. But it's much different than playing a team that just came off of a 7-game series and winning it in overtime. So I have to say, I was not expecting to win game 1. I actually am quoted, if you go over to Kirby Lupo and Spaces, that I didn't think Florida was going to win the first game, and I actually predicted it would be a 3 or 5-1 loss. And it's just because you have to have that mentality. You have to have the physicality to understand, what that series is going to be about. And Boston definitely gave it to them. They won every battle. They were not allowing the Panthers to do anything. And, that kind of went into game 2. Boston scored first. They threw some pucks at Bob, and Bob didn't look comfortable. Tkachuk got hit by Brad Marchand, trying to make a move. And I think that pretty much woke the boys up after that. So it's going to be a long series. And I think the more games that the teams play, the harder it's going to be. I think game 2 is going to carry over into game 3. You're going to see, I don't want to say fights, but you're going to get a lot of those, end of whistle scrubs. And we'll see when Sam Bennett comes back. I know that's something that we'll discuss later, but I just have a feeling. I have a feeling about him and one player on Boston that really could use a really good butt kicking. That's all.
Great opening statement by you, my friend. But also, when you think about, you spoke about practices and not getting into games. The big difference between just overall game speed and just practice speed, where you're going against the same guys in practice where them, versus you're seeing so many different teams in an 82 game season, but then preparing for one and one only. That is a difference when you're dialed into a whole 7 game series too. But also for the Florida Panthers, I mean, I really do want to see how they perform on the power play outside of a blowout, and how it performs in a clutch situation. That's really what I want to see as far as the difference coming up in the series. But also for the Panthers, I mean, we can't expect, we're not going to expect a Forsling and an Ekblad to have nights like they did in game 1. So great response for them in game 2. I mean, it's just unlike them. When you see the guy who's led the NHL in plus minus with plus 50 something for Forsling, I mean, it's just you see that as maybe like a one-off. But then you think about the unselfishness of the other guys. I mean, Barkov talking about he just wants to win, even though he was playing defense after all those misconducts. And also, there's this one commenter on Twitter who actually brought up a good point that I did not consider when it comes to the blowouts from Boston's end versus the Panthers' end. The Panthers didn't need 2 empty net goals to prove a point on Wednesday night too. So that was really about trying to get in the psyche. I know something I asked Frank Fort after game 2 about being in their psyche, and he said no. And I kind of agree. I get that you're trying to get an upper edge and be in their heads too. But I mean, just the way the Panthers did it too. I mean, it's definitely great to have that on the tail end. If you're talking about of splitting the 2 home games, where at the tail end, you feel a lot better because now you're playing in a different setting coming up.
Definitely. And, at that first period, you felt like they were still skating through mud. It just, a lot of things were not working. And finally, things changed. The lines were changed up. I think that gave them some energy. And then Steven Lorentz gets rewarded. With that open I don't know what Boston was doing, to be honest. I don't know how you leave a guy in front of the net all alone like that, but to have the perfect tip that he did to really ignite everything that happened, just so much emotion and so much built up with the Panthers after game 1 finally could decrease. They could let off some steam. They could do what they needed to do and really control the game from there. You can't say enough, about Barkov's goal that came, and then probably the most important goal to me was Gus Forsling's goal to finish the second period, because he just, if you see a picture of that, the amount of torque he had on his stick, there was no way that wasn't going through everybody. So, again, going back to the whole practice thing, when you practice, there's not a lot of emotion unless, the team is not doing well. I'll use Detroit as an example because Lucas Raymond and who was the defenseman that we had for a little bit that didn't play that well? He just left from Montreal. Sherratt. Yeah, they got into a fight in practice because things weren't going well and something needed to change. So, and that really did kind of actually help them a little bit. I know they missed the playoffs, but they did kind of, come out of their, dead roll spin that they were in. But when you're in the playoffs and everything, you really can't afford things like that. You have to mentally get out of that yourself. And I think Stenlund's goal from, a game 2 standpoint was probably the biggest thing. And I think it really took the pressure off the first and second line. They can finally get into a groove and play the game that they're used to, and that laid the land for the rest of the team.
Yeah, definitely. And big deal for Steven Lorentz getting that one for the Panthers, and also with Paul Maurice just knowing when to change up those lines necessary. And we'll talk a lot more of Paul Maurice and where he stands as far as tenured coaches in the NHL. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss more about the mutual respect that's actually there between Matthew Tkachuk and David Pastrnak, regardless of them getting into that fight back in game 2. We're going to discuss this and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Policy Genius. And Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with a financial safety starting today. Policy Genius helps you compare your options from top companies, and their team of licensed experts is on hand to help you talk through it. Talk to a team of award-winning agents who will talk you and walk you through the process step by step. Easily compare quotes from America's top insurers in just a few clicks to find your lowest price. Your work-life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family's needs. Even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. They have no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you can trust their guidance. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonhl or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonNHL. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you the can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Back on this Friday, May 10th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Fairbanks Friday edition of the show, Game 3 preview edition of Fairbanks Friday. So, Nick, I want to discuss more about something that Matthew Tkachuk spoke about after his media availability today after practice about just the fight between him and David Pastrnak. And Tkachuk spoke about how he wanted to settle something now in game 2. Pasta said, "Oh no, we'll settle it in game 3." But there was no guarantees that there was going to be that level, that score. And if it's a 2-2 game, you're likely not going to put your team at risk when it comes to getting the fisticuffs off for both guys. So perfect moment for both of them. But also what they said after. Pasta's talking about how he'll defend his teammates. Even if it's a blowout, you still want to show some fight. Matthew Tkachuk spoke about how those two guys, these two are in constant conversation of who is the best winger in the NHL. It's always one of those conversations as far as those guys along with other guys like an Artemi Panarin, Jason Robertson too. There's a lot of that conversation for that. But just about these two with also being in the top 3 of the Hart too. So there was also a lot of mutual respect when talking about two guys just wanting to compete and when it came to that fight. So what did you make of what Tkachuk had to say after practice today on that fight?
Shows to me that hockey goes beyond, the game itself, that, two competitors, while they can have fiery differences and they can have emotions on the ice, but, when they're off it, they can understand that each of them in their own little bubble does have a significant influence on the game. If Florida didn't have Matthew Tkachuk, I can't say where they would be right now or what the franchise would look like, especially with how it's blossomed over the last 2 seasons. And then you have David Pastrnak, who, is just one of the best goal scorers in the game. He can get on a heater anytime, and he's been through a lot of rough things. So, I mean, it's good to see that he's actually going to step up now for his team after kind of what they went through the other night. And, it's just not a side that you really see of him. Sometimes you don't really see him drop the gloves, but, I think it's good for hockey, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
You see 2 superstars, decide to drop the gloves and get it over with. Because usually you'll see, like a a Rempe and another, fighter on another team go at it, and people love it. But how much of that does that draw you to the game? Would you rather want to see, like, for example, what if Brad Marchand and Barkov decided to drop gloves? I mean, that would be interesting to me. I'm not equating that they should do that or that who would win, but just I think the impact that it would have on the game and the viewers watching it. So I'm just glad that they have respect for each other, that there's not like an actual hatred, but the fact that, hey, we're both here, we're both trying to compete, we're both trying to win.
Yeah, and also Matthew Tkachuk is like, we're not out there playing patty cake. We're doing what's best also for our legacy. So knowing about what the task is at hand while still having that respect for one another. And also, Kyle Okposo had a 10-minute media availability, and it's just Kyle Okposo is just a guy that you want to run through a wall for when it came to everything that he continuously has to say, and spoke about when it comes to the training that Alexander Barkov has, and talk about it off the ice, and always knew that he was a hard worker, but then really sees it on now being with him on the daily too, when it comes to being in the same locker room, and also Okposo being honest about his career and where it's at, and knowing that he's on the tail end too. And then and again, speaking about the second goal where you get that partial change, and you see where Okposo's head is at with not being in the postseason for 8 seasons with Buffalo, having to mentor young kids, and now he has that weight lifted off his shoulder about having to mentor guys. So now it's all about just guys being themselves too, and just knowing about we speak all about Barkov being that quiet leader, and then Tkachuk being that louder guy. But also it relates to different parts of life where you have a certain group of friends where one person might be more outspoken than the other when it comes to just talking about things, even if it's not sports related. Even for this podcast too. Like for me, for example, I'm not the one who fires off so many hot takes here, but hey, with the various guests that I have here, if they want to fire off hot takes, I'll let them be them too. So that's the great thing about Kyle Okposo, and the unselfishness of him when he came in, getting to know a new group, and just to see how he fits in too. I mean, it's just there's so many great things to say about Kyle Okposo, and that was something that was said even before the trade. So loved what I heard about from Kyle Ocho, as I like to say. What were your impressions from what he said?
So it's very hard for an individual to go from where he was at in Buffalo, for like signing his free agent contract, to becoming a mentor and things just not working out. I mean, Buffalo's been out of the playoffs for I think over a decade now, and
2011.
it's just, yeah. So it's been very hard, and sometimes when you try to push too hard or you grip your stick too much, things just don't work out. He could not have landed in a better team, with open arms, understanding what the job is and what they want to do and what they want to accomplish. Maurice says it, that everybody can be themselves, that they police themselves. His comments about Barkov training almost tells me that if he sees Barkov training as hard as he's doing, is that maybe he wasn't used to that in Buffalo. Guys would, just work out just to work out and, get themselves ready, but not take the extra time or the extra preparation that it takes to get to the level that you're at right now. And, unfortunately, maybe it's just something that fell on deaf ears, or that, like maybe with this generation, that they don't need it. They already have the talent. They don't need to work for it. But he couldn't have, like I said, he could not have ended up in a better situation. And, as, somebody who really wants to see Florida win a cup, he could be one of those players that is just the difference. He still has a good head on him. He wants to support. And, his line the other night was the main reason why Florida was able to cap off the blowout win that they did. So if he can do that every couple games and just make sure that the ship is sturdy, I think he'll be all right.
Yeah, and he had 4 head coaches during his time there. there in Buffalo. So, and speaking of
Florida
coaching,
knows all about that.
yeah. Speaking of coaching, Paul Maurice is now the 8th longest tenured coach in the NHL. He just got here. So there's a lot of turnaround that's going on and has been going on. I mean, there's at least like 9 from the start of this past season, with Mike Babcock being fired before the season even started too. But then you think about Sheldon Keefe just yesterday, even though that was probably the best series that the Toronto Maple Leafs had probably played under Keefe with how structured they were defensively. But that was more of a it's due. You haven't accomplished much too. But it also speaks about the landscape of the NHL, of how much pressure there is to win too. And I mean, and Palmer spoke about adjustments. Spoke about how 80% of adjustments is going back to what you do well. That's a quote that really stood out to me when he spoke about that today. And really, I mean, you look at what happened with the Florida Panthers in Game 2. They got to the net front. Yeah, we spoke about missed assignments, especially on Steven Lawrence's goal. I believe it was Forbort who went too much to the near side corner, which left them all alone as far as supporting the puck. So that's a communication breakdown there. But really, it came down to going back to who you were, and that's really it's not. Paul Maurice isn't a guy who I believe is going to overthink things, and just knowing his group well and just saying, you don't have to force your game to be a different style. I mean, and that goes back to the whole Toronto Maple Leafs and what they did as far as defensive structure for them. But it was away from what they were doing with the 4 superstars and just scoring goals in bunches and on the power play, which they only scored 1 in that series too. So that's another bit of perspective for Paul Maurice and not only that, of how maybe COVID affected things was in regard to timeline for certain coaches to get the job done, but with the cap crunch, teams couldn't do as much as they wanted to. And the Florida Panthers, they've done well with what they had.
Yeah, and I think leadership, it comes in all different forms. People say it's a top-down thing. I'm more used to, having the bottom line actually be able to rise up and actually take responsibility or accountability for what their goals are. And I think you can see that with the Florida Panthers. The players police themselves. They're the ones that actually want to get the job done. Not saying that Maurice doesn't, but he's there to kind of help guide them and push them in the right way or make changes as he sees fit. And he knows that, again, that this has worked before. So, he can put Reinhart back with, Barkov and for Hagee or Tarasenko. He has all these things that have worked before. So it's not like it's out of the blue, like, oh, what is he doing? The other thing, too, I will say about the Toronto and Sheldon Keefe thing, why did it take them probably till Austin Matthews got hurt to play that defensive structure? Like, they could have played that last season. They could have played it to start the series against Boston now, and they probably would have been in a little bit better shape. But understandably, he probably didn't want to go away from that because that wasn't their identity. Their identity was the core 4 and scoring goals. Well, they can't score goals during the postseason, unfortunately, for them. And it was a little bit too late for him to make changes. And, maybe on his next stop, he'll be quicker to do that. And he won't let the personnel push him around. Like, he will basically say, this is what I've seen. This is what I want to do. And if you guys don't like it, then there's going to be a culture change. But, back to Maurice also being the 8th longest tenured coach, and it being it's 2 full seasons already, obviously.
Yeah.
But
crazy to think.
After, the game with Carolina, he might be the 6th or 7th after this. So I think there's going to be some more movement, but just stick to what make sure that the players are bought in and that they respect you and they respect each other. And don't let the cap be an excuse. Florida's doing exactly what they're doing, and they're being successful because of it. Is it the coach's fault because you signed 4 players or north of $11 million that why your team isn't doing well? Maybe, maybe not. But at the same time, you have to look at other ways to be successful or find bargains. And if Bill Zito and his management team is doing that, then maybe you want to take a page out of his book.
Yep. So has consistently found a way to get these value signings. I mean, Josh Mahura, Gus Forsling, Brandon Montour on his cheap deal. So it's just you finding ways. And Bill Zito has definitely done that to help his coaching staff. And Paul Maurice has done that, even though run and gun, they said, no, we're gonna play this way because this is how you win. But we're gonna transition over to segment number 3, where we're gonna discuss more about tonight's game. What could Sam Bennett's status be? And also how excited the Florida Panthers are to get back on the road. We're going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. There's no I in team, but there is one in Indeed. That's the hiring platform you need to help build yours. When you're hiring, you need Indeed. Indeed is a hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Indeed does the hard work for you. Indeed shows you candidates whose resumes on Indeed fit your description immediately after you post, so you can hire faster. Even better, Indeed is the only job site where you can pay for applications that meet your must-have requirement. Indeed is the unbelievably powerful hiring platform, delivering 4 times more hires than all other job sites combined, according to Talent Nest 2019. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer good for a limited time. Claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/lockedon. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Third and final segment here on this Friday, May 10th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Fairbanks Friday edition of the show of Friday, Game 3 between the Florida Panthers and the Boston Bruins from the TD Garden, 7 p.m. on TNT with Brendan Burke, Darren Pang, and Jackie Redmond. And let's quickly talk about this because we have about like 5 minutes left here on the show. So Paul Maurice did say that Sam Bennett will participate in a full skate tomorrow. So all signs are possibly leading to him playing. He did say a few days ago, even before Game 2, about the next 1 to 3 games. So if you're averaging that out somewhere in the middle, boom, Game 3 seems to be that timeline for Sam Bennett there. But also, Matthew Tkachuk spoke about how it's a Friday night in Boston and it's playoff hockey. I love that mindset out of Matthew Tkachuk, just going there and say, hey, we're ready for the environment. And he said, we're used to hatred. We just go out there and play. And honestly, Panthers are used to that crowd noise. They were 3-1 in Boston last year in the postseason. The Boston Bruins are 2-2 in this year's postseason at home. So they're vulnerable there, and their home record is just as identical on the road. But the hardest part is for tonight, Nick, for Paul Maurice, is just knowing that he needs to scratch somebody if Sam Bennett does return, because Lundell's going to go back to the third line. Stenlund, you need him for your penalty kill. He's going to be that fourth line center. Lawrence and Okposo has been great. Is Nick Cousins the odd man out here?
Are you asking me for real? No. Nick Cousins is not going to be the guy that goes out. I think for whatever it's worth, he ingratiated himself in the playoffs last year and was up on that second line with Bennett and Tkachuk. All right. Mm-hmm. He played a very pivotal role, and now he's playing another role, being the good teammate to stay on the fourth line, with Okposo and Stenlund. I think when it comes to who's going to be scratched, unfortunately, I think it's going to be Lorentz.
Yeah.
So I think Cousins he adds something, and you don't see Lorentz really getting in the mix of everything, but everybody's always aware of where Nick Cousins is on the ice, and they make sure, like, hey, he's right here. Let me just, try to rattle him a little bit. I mean, Pat Maroon tried it, and look what happened to him. He got tossed. So
he got tossed, yeah.
I mean, even though Lorentz scored, I think Nick Cousins brings a mentality or a specific play type in the playoffs that you do need. So I think he's going to stay.
Yeah, and fair point for you. Just think about it a little bit as Lawrence can play both on the center and the wing. But when you think about flexibility, I mean, it worked for a while in the postseason last year when you get him on that Bennett and Tkachuk line and just letting and then just letting Barkov, Verhaeghe, Reinhart do their thing too last season for them and for when it comes to just everything being in balance for the Panthers here. And I mean, you have just think about it. You have Bennett who can drop the gloves too against the opposition. Matthew Tkachuk who is banging you around the boards, battling it out. Nick Cousins who will it's not only about the hard hits, but it's about how he intimidates the other teammate too. Yeah, we talk about Stephen Lawrence being the nice guy on the team, but when you are going in a road environment and you need some meanness, some nastiness, Nick Cousins is your guy when it comes to that. And the quote that Paul Maurice said, it's hard because there's just so much chemistry on that line. That's the hardest part of it. But listen, once again, those are the good problems for the Panthers to have. I mean, like Eric Stahl at one point was your third line center in the Stanley Cup final. Once that ended, there's no call up of Zach Dalpe, which Paul Maurice spoke about Zach Dalpe not being a Black Ace, saying he has a family, he knows where he's at. There's three or four other peoples that you're going to call up right before him. So he was honest with them. Great for Paul Maurice also that he's not lying to players too. So we could appreciate that for him. But that's also when it comes to Cousins just staying in the mix, it goes back to that one word of identity for the Panthers too, and just what they're, because they've gotten that fourth line scoring in game 3 of the Tampa series, and then in this series too. So I mean, you don't want to go away for even though once again both teams live in 24-hour increments. When you get to game 3 and you have Cousins there, and when you're trying to test everything out with a home crowd too, yeah, like I said, it's a familiar place, but it's a new situation, it's a new series, it's new players, different bounces too, different scrums. You want a guy like Cousins out there in those situations.
So I will say this, and I know I mentioned this, in our chat. I think a lot depends on when Bennett comes back, because I have a feeling he won't be back for game 3, and this is just me. I haven't talked to anybody. I don't have any inside news. If anything, I'm the last guy you should probably go to for inside news. Okay, I'm just putting that little hashtag there. But I think, yeah, exactly. I might put a hashtag next to it, like don't take my words for.
Okay, fair.
But I think they may rest him depending on what the team looks like. They might give Lawrence another game in game 3 just to see how that line continues on the road. And then, if it doesn't work and Florida ends up going down 2-1, then you can insert Bennett, because the kind of impact he will have, especially looking at last season when he came in and gave them a huge boost and was able to help them overcome the 3-1 deficit. But the only time that I think I would put in Bennett, and it is when he's willing and able to do something about Charlie McAvoy. I want somebody on this team to step up or answer the bell, because he is going around saying that he's not trying to hurt anybody. And I quoted it a couple days ago when he said that he wasn't trying to hurt OEL with his elbow earlier in the season. And then you see the replay of game 1 where cross-checks him in the back and then swings a stick at him. It's like, okay, you're not trying to hurt anybody, but here you are. Here's the evidence and everything. Just a player that I think needs to be put in his place and understand that this is not the way the game is supposed to be played. And if you want to continue to do that, you have to answer for it. And that's what hockey's all about. And the reason why I say it's got to be Sam Bennett, was it Brett Pesce that he did that to last year? Or was it in Carolina, where he just went up and just laid the hit on the guy and he was out?
Slavin. Jacob Slavin.
might have a repeat if he doesn't, keep his head up, or if he's not, paying attention to what's going on. And he hasn't had a good series, McAvoy.
Mhm.
He's given the puck up a lot. He may be hurt right now, which they're not really disclosing, but I'm just saying all it takes is one hit, and I'm talking clean, not dirty. I never advocate for that, but McAvoy is somebody that needs to, I guess, answer for what he's been doing and getting away with.
One more thought before we get out of here about your comment of whether Bennett should play on this situation. If he's healthy, I think he should play. I think he should play to try to win and play instead of playing not to lose. And that's also a discussion on the other side with whether to start Linus Ullmark or Jeremy Swayman too on that side. I think you still go back to Swayman. And if you were going to Ullmark as a just in case, then we'll put him back in if they're down. I think if Jim Montgomery were to do that, it would be playing to not lose instead of trying to play to win. So I think if you're still trying to at least steal one, you want to at least set it early, because like I said, when you drop at home, you want to get your win on the latter half so you feel confident going into the road. It's the opposite for me. When the Panthers hit the road, you want to get that one early in the set of 2 games too. So
That's a good point.
for the Panthers, play to win, play instead of playing not to lose. So
they shouldn't be afraid to do that.
No, not at all. But Nick, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Hopefully it comes with a win and a 2-1 series lead for the Panthers. Tell everybody where they can follow you online.
You guys can follow me on X at Prudential0. Remember, I'm going to have that hashtag. Don't take my words for granted, or with gold. But let's calm down. I know game 1 was a little bit worrying because, we hadn't played in a week, and here comes this team, Boston, played as well as they did. Now here's where the real games start, guys. We have to win 3 games in 5. Let's get at it. Let's get healthy, and hopefully Bennett is there to give us that boost that we need.
Absolutely, man. And thank you as always, man. And I will see you next week, my friend.
I'll see you next week.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Steve Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Nich Fairbanks, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.